Hey guys, so I didn't read the arc that I was supposed to read for today, but that's okay because what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to bring you the history video that I meant to bring you last week. Life is an absolute trip, but one of the reasons that I wanted to do this video last week, even though it really doesn't have anything to do with the day itself, is because I was thinking about how much in history words matter and the history of words matter, particularly when we think about something like Indigenous Peoples Day and how that was renamed from Columbus Day and all of the reasons it was Columbus Day to begin with, even though Columbus didn't even have a good reputation in Spain when he was alive, but we had it's like a whole thing, right? And how much meaning there can be in taking something like Columbus Day and renaming it Indigenous Peoples Day, and what that choice means to literally, in some ways, right, just swap out one word with another word, but it has so much meaning, and especially as we talk about, I've been doing a lot obviously with the courts recently and textualism, originalism, and a lot of debate over what words in the Constitution mean or redefining things maybe. I wanted to do a video focused on some books that I hadn't been able to tell you guys about yet in one of these features in which words matter, and it's going to scan the whole gambit of time, so hopefully there's a topic here that maybe you're probably going to be more interested in and some others, but and also from a couple of different perspectives, but that is kind of like the theme. Words in history matter and the history of words matter. So in no particular order, one that I want to start with is American Dialogue, The Founders and Us by Joseph Ellis. Now, Joseph Ellis is a really well-respected American historian, particularly of the founding period. And one of the really interesting things in this book is that he takes a certain founder and puts them basically in dialogue with our ideas today about a certain topic versus their writing on that topic. So I wanted to look this up and read this directly from the book itself because I didn't want to get them mixed up. But this book discusses Jefferson and issues of racism, Adams and the specter of economic inequality, Washington and American imperialism, and Madison and the doctrine of original intent. So again, each kind of section of the book takes on the writings and thoughts, ideas of a certain founder and a certain idea with which they were closely related. I will say that for me, this book wasn't super fantastic, just in the sense that I have read full books on each of these founders and discussing their interaction with these ideals plus, or at least one book, if not more. So for me, I found this book to be, because it's like one book that covers all of these things in a little bit of a shorter space, to be kind of, I don't want to say surface level because Joseph Ellis is like a really good writer and a researcher, but for me, I've just already read deeper. And so this was not a book that was really like a super like, oh, I learned something new from this. However, if, like I said, you are a person who wants to understand these concepts and the ways that these particular founders are really thinking about them without having to go off the deep end as I usually do, this is a great book that in a engaging way provides an overview. Words matter here because in a day and age when people are ascribing like ideas or concepts to certain founders or saying they thought this or they thought this, like this is a book that takes us back to their words and what they had to say. So the second book that I want to bring up is Behold America, A History of America First and the American Dream by Sarah Churchwell. Now, if it isn't clear from that title, what Churchwell has done here has written a book that is the history of phrases. And it's the history of the phrase American First and then the history of the phrase American Dream. And from their first use that she can trace back in the historical record and how they were used and what they meant and how they have been used and potentially misused by groups or how their meaning has changed over time. And really, it's such a fascinating way to think about the history of America through the history and the groups and the people and the factions, if you will, that have used these different phrases and how they've used them or turned them to like work for their own agenda. Because the way that like American Dream, or really even America First for me, like the first couple of iterations, they're almost unrecognizable from maybe some of the first associations that we have with them today, or how we interpret them today, how we use them today, etc. If you are someone who is, like me, really interested in the history of words and how words impact history and how like words change over the course of history, this is just such a good book. I immediately went out and like bought my own copy because I just wanted to annotate it and have it, because it's just like so fascinating, and definitely a way that like I had read history that involved these phrases, right? But like using it as like a linguistic history, oh, it was so fascinating. It was so cool. And to see them like back and forth. Oh, again, if you are a word nerd like me and a history nerd like me, I really recommend this one. A book that I am putting on this list because I thought it would have a little bit more history of the word of history situation going on is Ministry of Truth, Democracy, Reality, and the Republicans' War on the Recent Past by Steve Bannon, or Bannon. I'm not sure how you say that. Pictures up. This was an enjoyable read, certainly in of the sense that Steve, whose last name I can't pronounce correctly probably, is a good writer. It's written in a very like popular nonfiction way. But again, for me, I don't really know that it gave me anything new to chew on. In terms of what I was really hoping to get was, the different ways in which different stories, words, ideas have been like changed or co-opted to fit a certain agenda, or what it means when we like change the ideas of history or start telling history differently. Because let's be very real, no matter what side of any aisle you're on, history is the story that a certain person is telling you at the time. Even people who write really good history books cannot include the full context of everything always happening of all time in their book. And so every single, even nonfiction book, is plotted in a certain way, much like a fiction book is. And so that's what I was hoping to get from this. I didn't really get it. It just seemed like more of like a popular nonfiction primer for people who haven't read some of the books that I have. And honestly, I think that you could read better. I actually did a video where I read a bunch of, not the same, but similar books about, for example, the impact of 90s era talk radio, which was really important, and stuff like that, on how our political vocabulary has changed. There's the whole thing with Newt Gingrich, who like releases a list of words that Republicans are supposed to use. All of this has been, I think, better documented and better explored in some of those books that I talk about in honestly other videos on this channel. So, American Dialogue, history book. Behold America, linguistic history book. Ministry of Truth, popular political science book, probably more than like a history book. And now we're gonna step all the way out of history and head to psychology. And there is a reason that I'm including this book in this list. I have talked about this book before, I think in my Read to Resist video, which I'll link up above. But now I just want to kind of hammer home the importance of words in the psychological concept. So this book is Good, Reasonable People, The Psychology Behind America's Dangerous Divide by Keith Payne. And this is basically a book that talks about what it means when people on both sides of an issue intrinsically think of themselves as good, reasonable people. And it is a very full of like history of psychology on belief and belief formation that's really interesting. But I think understanding that like sometimes when you're in a conversation with a person and it just feels like you're on both sides of the issue and you really can't understand how this other person's ideas are just so antithetical to what you would consider to be a good, reasonable opinion, that person on the other side intrinsically, in order to maintain any type of self-worth, sees themselves also as a good and reasonable person. And there is obviously a lot of psychology behind that. And I mean, we can even debate what it means. And I think we should in this scenario to consider oneself a good and reasonable person. What is the context of your goodness, right? Which is probably being defined differently by different people. And what does it mean to be reasonable, right? Again, a word that we could define in a number of different ways in this idea of self-concept. But for me, reading this book and reading about the history of all of this research that's been done in psychology about how people form their belief systems and how they come to believe what they believe, and how we all, and I do mean us all, because this is something that we all do as human beings, we entrench ourselves in a belief system that honestly becomes like a part of our personality, right? In ways that are non-political even, right? And we become so attached to them that, we take a questioning of them at times as a personal attack. And then what it means to be able to distance ourselves from that and to say, I am not my beliefs and I'm willing to sit in discomfort. Again, it's just one of those things when you start to feel like there are these conversations that are happening that make no sense because you cannot fundamentally understand the base of the other person on the other side, rather than just being like, ah. Not that this helps you to really like maybe understand some of those beliefs, but to at least believe, or to at least understand how that person believes a number of these things that even at times seem to be contradictory. So I really appreciated this book. And again, I really liked the title. And understanding that we all think of ourselves as good and reasonable people. We have to do that in order to survive on this planet and to consider ourselves to be living a life worth living, but we all define that in so many different ways. And finally, I want to talk about this book, Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future by Jason Stanley. Jason Stanley has also written a book called How Fascism Works that may be another book that you want to pick out in this time and place. But what I love about Erasing History is it's quite small, right? I mean, this is like a really thin, it's like a small book, right? It's like the size of my head, which is why I wanted to have you guys see my physical copy. But this is a tiny book that when I picked it up, I thought there is no way that Jason Stanley is going to be able to encapsulate the reasons and the ways in which fascist movements throughout history have erased the past and like basically legislated history, controlled history, retold history for nationalist aims and for really control aims in a book this small. Like I thought there was no way. I like me a 500, 800 page history book. I am that person. This book is incredible. I read it in one sitting on a plane. I bought it, I underlined it, I highlighted it. The amount of history and actionable history that is in this book for its size, it's just an exceptional writing achievement, period. In the contents, it is broken down into how to create an autocracy, colonizing the mind. It talks about the Nationalist Project, the movement from supremacism to fascism, the difference between being anti-education and also advocating for a classical education, and then ways in which we can reclaim our history. And even if we want to argue about fascism, I mean, he brings it up in here, right? That like, even if we want to argue about fascism is or isn't happening in this country, that there are definitely a lot of elements of the fascist project, and that's probably more of what he talks about in his book, How Fascism Works. But I just want to read, there's so many good quotes in here, but I do just want to read and end on a quote from this, which is, "Exposing a nation's citizens to the complex history of its past is not just a form of protection against fascists and demagogues. It is also, as my father would say, an essential prerequisite for civic compassion. Democracy requires a common shared reality, including a common understanding of the past. Civic compassion furthers that understanding. To cite again from my father's quotation above, the challenge is the more difficult one of bringing people to the point of understanding the objective historical and existing conditions of groups with whom they have no personal life experience. Without such understanding, one cedes power to hierarchy or potentially an autocrat. What I love about this, I think it goes back to what I was talking about how words matter and the context of words matters, right? Because it is one thing to learn history, it is another thing to understand history, to think about history critically, and to use historical stories, whether they be from ancient times or more recent times, to develop an understanding of people who are not the same as us and to generate that civic compassion. And one of the things that I love reading history for is to understand all the things that make up our moment today and all of the things that I'm not aware of that went into making our moment today, all of the people, the places, the things, and the contradictions in them all. So words matter, the history of words matter, and I hope there's at least one book in this list that you're interested in picking up, or you can check out the rest of this series for books that are maybe more themed and something you're interested in. So thank you so much, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye.